I'm going to go ahead and call the meeting to order, and from time to time I will be turning on Senator Miller's mic just for the entertainment value of it. All right, we have 4 items on today's agenda. The first is just an update on MARTA's progress with regard to its action plan for the KPMG audit recommendations, particularly with regard to privatization. The second is, and I'll decide what order we're going to do the second and the third in. The second is the overtime issue that came to light in the media. I will be, it was reported both on WSB TV and in the Atlanta Journal-Constitution. I do view it as an area of concern and may be asking MARTA to come up with a plan of attack to fix the issue. But we'll discuss that when we get to it. The third is a discussion of, at a prior meeting we had suggestion by MARTA that it anticipates an increase in its overall bonded debt burden. As I recall, and I'm just speaking from memory, Mr. Allen presented that MARTA's bonded debt service was about 40% of its sales tax revenues. That went down into the high to mid 30s, but is anticipated to go up into the low to mid 40s at some point, and it's that last piece that I'd like an explanation of why that is, what MARTA is anticipating doing that would require that increase in debt burden. And the last is a presentation, but as I understand it, there was a presentation to the MARTA board about some public safety initiatives that have been spearheaded by our new general manager, Mr. Parker, and we are interested in hearing about those initiatives. They sound interesting, and they were relayed to me by Representative Riley, and I thought that it would be a good topic to cover in this meeting. So why don't we start off with the KPMG progress, and for that I will go ahead and turn on the mics of Chairman Daniels and Mr. Parker, and we'll go from there. Need to pull the mic to you, though.
Good morning, everyone. I don't have a whole lot to say. We are focused on execution, and Mr. Parker is going to bring forth what we're doing in terms of our execution for the KPMG study. So,
thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, members of the committee. We have received an initial draft of just an outline of how we will move forward on the report. But next week we will have a detailed draft that again lays out a roadmap for us in implementing the various recommendations that came out of the study. We anticipate this will look in the form of a series of things that we can do in the first few months, other items that may take a longer period of time, say 6 months to a year, and then those that may take even multiple years to accomplish. The plan is that we will take that information, begin to digest it internally, meet with the board of directors, meet with numerous community stakeholders who would be impacted by this work, certainly spend a lot of time with our own employees and so forth, and come back to the board with an action plan. Obviously, we'd be updating MARTOC on those actions as well. We believe, again, middle of next week or so, we should have the report in hand and then move forward earnestly with implementation.
Right, and this is the report that's being prepared, the action plan that's being prepared by KPMG.
Yes, yes.
When you say you expect to have a detailed draft next week, I assume that is for presentation to the board?
Once it's ready, we will probably be making the presentation to the board at the next scheduled meeting early February.
Okay, so it will just be ready next week.
It'll be ready.
Do you have an estimate of what day that might be?
Early in the week, I'm assuming Tuesday or so.
Okay, as soon as it becomes ready, can you distribute it to me, and I will get it on to what I'll get it on to all the members you see here. I don't know who's going to be on Martoc next term, but I'll make sure that I that I get it distributed to all the folks who have served these past 2 years. As soon as it becomes available. The other question is, where do we stand with regard to the internal staff that is going to be allocated to implementation?
What we plan to do is use existing resources, and whether that means using a vacant position and filling it or moving various people around. But our goal, as we mentioned last month, is to make sure that the folks who are working on this, it is their primary focus, that this is what they will be doing, waking up every day and going home at night thinking about how they implement these recommendations from this study. We've not finalized that yet because we want to see what those recommendations look like, especially as it relates to what the workload will be. I wouldn't want to bring on a couple of people and then see that really the harder work or the work that requires more hours may be several months off. So I want to see what KPMG lays out to us first, and then we'll staff it accordingly.
Okay.
But the plan is to staff it with existing resources.
Okay. I think that's fair. How soon after you receive the recommendations do you anticipate making a decision on that, Mr. Parker?
It'll be difficult to guess that because I don't know I don't know their plans yet as it relates to what things get done early. There may be some low-hanging fruit that they come up with that we can do with existing staff folks and not need any additional help. But I'm assuming there may be more intensive requirements in terms of staff time and so forth. If that is in the first few months of engagement, then we'll need to potentially hire some folks or move some people around very quickly. But I just don't know yet until I see that draft.
All right. I'll circle up with you about that shortly after we get the initial draft.
That's right.
Okay. Any questions on this subject matter for Mr. Parker or Mr. Daniels? Well, Mr. Parker. All right. Seeing none, we'll move on to the next topic. Why don't we move on to the bonded debt issue if Mr. Allen will come forward as well.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman, members of the Martoc Committee. You have a handout there in front of you. This is the presentation that we presented, I believe, about 2 months ago. I'm going to ask you to turn your attention to the last page of the presentation there, where it says Model Debt Service, the little charts you see. Just as background information to explain what the chart is saying to us, column 1 is simply our sales tax forecast, which the top half of the page is broken out by actual data. The bottom half of the page is broken out by forecast data. So the top half in column 1 are our actual sales tax that we've actually received between 2003 and 2012 in column 1. The bottom portion in column 1 is our forecast sales tax that we expect to receive in the future. Now, we broke that down by column 2, showing the 50% of that we can utilize on the capital side of the house. The next column, now column 3, the top portion again is our actual capital improvement budget. And right next to that, we want to put a column there in column 4 to show you our actual experience in executing the capital improvement budget historically. As you can see, when we got the fiscal year 11 and 12, our execution rate improved drastically. We had a CRP budget in fiscal year 12 of $185 million, and we executed that budget at $180.7 million. Now, down on the bottom portion in column 3,
Mr. Allen, why is that? Just
staffing and a lot of just getting things through the system. So right now, Rich Krisak, who is over all of the operational ends, has put a staff together that will look at how can we improve our execution ability on all of our contracts.
All right. So so taking FY 2012 for example, this would be the the current year's capital improvement budget, 185.5, right?
Last fiscal year 12. That's
Right,
correct.
right. I'm saying not current year, but I mean that year's
Absolutely.
capital improvement budget. And of that year's capital improvement budget, 180.7 was executed.
That's correct.
All right.
Okay. Now, on the bottom part of column 3 is our future CIP budget. That is the forecast for each of those fiscal years between 13 and 22. Now, where we left off at the last meeting, column 5 is the debt service that the chair asked us to come back today to explain. Column 5 at the top half is our actual experience, and I put a little mark on the side showing the actual experience that Marta had for debt service. The difference there in the top portion and the bottom portion is that the top portion is actual rates that we were actually charged on our bond issuance, and that's what drove the debt service. The bottom portion is our forecast rate, and as I stated the last time, forecast, we use a much higher rate than our actual experience has been. We're using about a 6% fixed rate in the forecast and a 2% variable rate for CIP, for CP in the forecast. Now, what drove the big jump from fiscal year 12 to 13, and I believe, Mr. Chairman, that was your question. When you look at this number, it's about a 16% jump in the forecast versus the actual between 12 and 13. The reason for that, at the end of 12, we issued $311 million in new bond debt. And that new bond debt is what's driving that huge increase in the forecast from 12 to 13. That's about a 16% jump. Now, keep in mind, that is a forecast. This week, we met and talked about how can we show this a little differently.
But the question is why? Like, what? We're in fiscal year 13 now. Yeah.
We're in 13 now.
I mean, what was the purpose of the new bond issue?
The new bond issue, I got a list of some of the things that we covered with that. That new bond issue covered our rail car rehabilitation program. Those were some of the big hitters. Our fare collection system, CCTV replacement, bus radio upgrade, a host of projects that we needed to help fund from that bond deal. And these projects are continuing on. The project I just named, that was just to fund the first phases of that project. Some of these projects go out to fiscal year 2022.
Right. Okay. Oh, oops. Sorry. Put that on silence. Hold on. I forgot to turn Senator Miller's mic on so everyone could hear that. Can you produce that list of what the new bond issue was used for?
I can get you complete.
Okay,
complete
that would be helpful. I'll also recognize some members who have their lights on. Representative Riley.
Thank you, and I was going to just follow up on that. You show for the CIP budget over the next 10 years a increase and then a significant decrease by 2018, 2019. So would that indicate that most of the new projects for the new debt will be in these first few years where it's above $200 million?
When you look at 18 and 19, if you look out in column 8, we're not issuing any debt during that period of time. And you're also paying down a little bit of your debt in column 9. So
but in column 3, the budget, the CIP budget, goes up from 2013, 2012, 13, 14, 15, and 16 are above $200 million. Is that the uses of the new debt reflected in those numbers?
In column, which column are you looking at?
Column 3.
3?
Mm-hmm.
Now, column 3 is the SIP budget. That's just what we're proposing for the capital improvement plan.
Correct.
And those numbers are pinch point. You see you got some lows there in 17, 18, and 19?
Correct. That's what I'm asking about. Have you utilized all of this new debt that you've just issued?
That's correct.
Before 2018?
Those are the pinch point. That's correct.
Now, the $5 million of CIP that wasn't used in FY 2012, is that roll into 2013?
Yes, ma'am. All those projects that was not executed, they're rolling into the next 10-year projects.
Okay, so you didn't use that to pay down debt. Instead, you've held it aside to be able to apply it
Right.
to an actual physical project.
Right. When you don't complete a project in a year, that project doesn't go away. You move that project to the next year or the next year out, and those funds go with it.
Correct. And we just wanted to clarify that you were doing that and not necessarily you had cost savings that you couldn't have allocated those monies that weren't utilized to debt service.
Right. No, we don't do that. We move the project out.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Now, one thing to make
Hold on one second, Mr. Allen. Senator Stoner.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Actually, I'm going to follow up a similar question now. You're referring to in the sense of y'all increasing your ability to basically complete your CIP budget in the sense of the amounts. I assume some of that has to do possibly with the procurement process.
Correct.
Sometimes, as I think was mentioned before by the GM CEO about trying to work on that, and that's something I think also you mentioned previous hearing that something we need to look at too concerning the MARTA Act potentially in the sense of making that basically a more efficient process. Mm-hmm. The other part is a question on the sense of different projects. I know you mentioned several projects there. Is also one of the things that y'all have to deal with concerning the safety issue concerning the train control situation. Is that already been budgeted in the sense concerning what happened in Washington several years ago?
Yes, sir. Rich.
As part of the requirements that the FTA and the federal government's requiring us to do on that issue. I assume that's some of this.
Yeah, that is correct. We have a program called Train Control Systems Upgrade that's probably about its third year right now.
Right.
So we're actually physically doing installation activities right now, some of which addresses just the general system aging, and some of it addresses specifically the WMATA issues.
Right, what happened in the train accident in Washington.
And the NTSB recommendations.
Right. Okay, thank you.
So I note in many years the ratio of debt service, and of course just to refresh, column 5 is what you project, but you're projecting more conservatively than the current interest rates would dictate, right? Which is column 6.
That's correct.
Okay,
that's correct.
Well, that's good. I guess the other point of concern is that I note that taking column 5 and column 1, the ratio of debt service to sales tax revenues stays roughly in the 42 to 43% range for a while. But that is all contingent upon the sales tax revenues panning out as you have them here.
That's correct. And that is another reason why we budget that conservatively with a higher rate in case there is a downturn in the sales tax. We'll cover it. See, right now, our board has given us some guidance not to exceed 45% of the total sales tax. In order to make sure that we do not exceed that 45%, we're keeping it around that 42% in our forecast also, the debt service to the total sales tax.
All right. Mr. Daniels, when was that guidance given? Was that under your watch or prior board? Or
That was done years ago, Mr.
That was
Daniels.
prior boards, but I will tell you that we've had detailed discussion in regards to the ongoing budget and the CIP plan, the CIP budget, and how we are looking at our overall revenues in regards to the debt forecast that we're putting forward. So although it was implemented by previous boards, we're in our budgeting process, in our ongoing discussions with Davis and his staff, is to make sure that we conservatively take a higher number and leave some cushion, if you will, for unforeseen changes that we can't control.
Which is what we're doing here, right?
That's correct.
But so, I mean, do you anticipate any change in the 45% guidance, or is that we're sticking with that?
We plan on sticking with that as it stands right now. Ideally, with what we're looking at from the perspective of KPMG and other changes to our revenue stream that will help, one, I guess you could say reinvest in service, but also look towards an opportunity to reduce our debt, which would reduce the overall amount of our budget that is allocated towards debt repayment.
All right, and this is either for Mr. Daniels or Mr. Allen. Does the 45% guidance exist in writing somewhere, or is it just in a...
Yes, sir, it's a board policy.
Okay, all right. Can I see that policy?
We'll get you a copy.
All right.
Yeah. Mr. Chairman, just
Yeah, hold on. We'll take people in the order they're recognized. Senator Miller.
I guess I'm trying to understand, cutting to the chase, that 2022 we've got $2.3 billion of debt, up from the $1.8 billion. Where's the cutoff when people say you got too much debt that you can service? I mean, it just seems that we're just increasing debt, and there got to be a point in time where lenders say, wait a minute, are you capable of doing this? Because I'm looking at, on the forecast, I'm looking at not pretty close to not quite a 50% increase in revenue forecast for that particular year from where we are now. It's about 160 million more of sales tax collection, I guess. And I'm not saying that's wrong. My question is, when will somebody say you got too much debt? I mean, I don't pretend to understand. All I know is, all I'm seeing is increasing debt, and to me, that's probably not a good thing, particularly in our country these days. And when is there enough is enough? I don't have the answer. I'm asking you if you're comfortable that we're going to be able to continue to have this kind of growth in the debt, or what are we looking for, manna from heaven somewhere that, I don't know. That's my question.
Well, I would like to say to the committee, and certainly this is something we talked a lot about during the entire interview process when I came on board,
right,
is that we do not have a sustainable business model, and that we have the numbers mean a lot, but when you really dig down into the numbers, what they are really saying to us is
we're in trouble.
Yes.
Okay.
And so to try to run the business the way we've done it in the past and do that moving towards the future is just not a wise course of action. So
my question's valid then?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah, okay.
Absolutely. You're asking the same questions that I asked when I saw these numbers. But the reality is what we need to change significantly is column 7, where the sales tax after we've paid the debt service, because that allows us to then invest back into the system and put more service on the street, do more things that customers would find acceptable in terms of getting them to ride our services more frequently. So the KPMG portion, as the chairman was, I think about to mention, presents some opportunity for us, hopefully to find some cost savings and efficiency savings, so that number, the sales tax after debt service, becomes much healthier. When we look at the growth of the debt from 1.8 to the 2.3, that's not out of line if the projections hold true of our sales tax revenue improving from the 341 to almost 500 million. Right. That part's okay. The greater issue, though, is the other ongoing cost of operating the business, and that's where we have to get some more efficiencies in place so that our model becomes more sustainable.
Have they given? Can I follow up?
Yes, sir.
Have they given you, or maybe you're still waiting for that? Have they given you the estimates of future revenue that they think you can realize? I mean, do you have those kind of numbers already in your head?
Just what you have.
That's just a report that we have at this point.
You all have it on the report. Is just
that's it. That's it so far. So nothing that's more concrete than that at this point in time.
No,
that's right.
But that's going to be, I guess you would say, the salvation is, or at least partial salvation. If
as the great John Wooden used to say, we'll see.
We'll see. Okay. Thank you.
All right. Number 22 is a new one. That Representative Taylor.
You just touched it, just a segue from Senator Miller's. You touched on sustaining things. Tell me about your paratransit. I know that was going out to bid recently, or has that been moved forward? I don't know which stage that's in. But are you looking at CNG for that as well? I don't know. All your buses run on CNG, correct?
Well, we have different fuel types. I don't know if the majority of our buses are now CNG. 70%.
Okay.
So that helps because CNG prices are very, very low currently.
But yeah, and I guess from an operational standpoint, you could combine maintenance activities with similar type fueled vehicles. Have you considered that at all, or as a long term, just as an operational cost? It goes to capital improvements, but the long term operational costs of running CNG versus diesel or go to gas.
You mean exclusively?
Yes.
Running one fuel exclusively. That's actually, there's some best practices out there and a lot of debate on whether you should ever go with one fuel type because they tend to spike at different times. Like right now, CNG has a cost equivalent of less of about $1 per gallon of regular diesel fuel. But we've seen that reversed in other times where the CNG costs were through the roof and diesel and other fuels weren't too bad. I don't know if we've done a full-fledged fleet analysis on our fuel types. Okay. We were going through that in some other city systems I've worked in. But I can get you a better answer on that at a later date. But going to a one fuel type exclusively may be like investing all of your investment dollars in one technology sector or what have you, and then you go up and down completely on that one segment.
Okay, thank you.
But there was another part you started out. I want to make sure
I know that the paratransit has been a kind of a I shouldn't say pet peeve, but are you still dealing with a lot of issues? And this is the dumping issues, what I'll call dumping. You know, people using MARTA as sort of Medicaid transport.
No, we will be coming back to you all with more information regarding that. We talked about this last month at when we mentioned our legislative agenda, that there's a problem currently where some private providers are using MARTA to pay for trips that they are reimbursed at a significant higher level than what they're paying for the service from taxpayers. So we will be giving you additional information on that.
Okay. Right. And it's the chair's view that results in a windfall to the providers and a huge cost to the taxpayers of Fulton and DeKalb counties in particular. I've asked Mr. Parker to quantify that for us for what I hope will be our next MARTOC meeting. And it certainly is a subject that could be addressed through legislation in either the 2013 or 2014 legislative session, depending on. I first want to see its impact on MARTA from a numbers perspective. But I thank you for bringing it up, Representative Taylor. Representative Riley.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just to follow up on Senator Miller's question, the additional $500 million in debt that will be taken on by the system over the next 10 years, correct me if I'm wrong, but is that will in no way expand any of the existing service delivery? That is purely for continued maintenance of the existing system?
That is correct.
And I think that, as you said, Mr. Parker, this is an unsustainable financial model if we are taking that significant amount of additional debt with no significant additional revenue streams by expanding the services. And also, frighteningly, having less sales tax after debt service payments to be able to flex in any way, shape, or form to enhance your operations. So unless I'm wrong, I just wanted to make sure that that's very clearly on everyone's minds, that this is very problematic, that you increase your line of credit exponentially and all you're doing is just existing maintenance. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Yeah, help me understand what happens if obviously, you've got this board guidance that debt service is to stay at 45% or less of sales tax revenues. Help me understand what happens. Obviously, you stay within 45% if these sales tax revenues, actually pan out that you have listed here. But these are just projections. So, help me understand what happens, what y'all do operationally if the sales tax revenues don't pan out as projected.
But the first thing we have to do is cut back on our capital program and operating because you can't fund the capital program if you do not have the sales tax here to pay the debt service for it. So that would be the first thing we would have to do is reduce the CIP.
So under no circumstances will you not stay below the 45%.
We would always be below it, but if the sales tax dropped too low, you may be funding a $100 million capital program.
Right.
You may be funding a $50 million capital program.
Right. All right. Senator Fort.
Good morning, Mr. General Manager. How you doing?
Very well, thank you, sir.
Good. What this tells me is what I think we all know, that Marty ain't got no money.
That's right.
So my question for you, I don't want to get into the weeds. What I want to know is, from your experience, and are there ways, because MARTA needs money, and it's got to get it from somewhere. It's not going to get it from the state. That's the reality as we sit here this very hour. The question I have for you is, are there revenue opportunities out there that you know of from other locations and other places around the country that we could put together here in Atlanta, here in Fulton County, here in DeKalb County? You know, because I'm hearing, you know, I was at the Transportation Committee meeting. I'm hearing a lot of what I've heard before, variations of we ain't got no money. The question I have, and I think the central question has to be, where does MARTA get money? Take into account the political realities that you're not going to get it from the state. Where do we get that money?
Well, I think we have to approach it from a two-pronged vantage point. One, meaning we have to look at opportunities to become more efficient. And that's where we can use the KPMG study, is to look for cost savings opportunities. Now, if all of their estimates were accurate and there are $50 million worth of savings available, that's a huge influx of new opportunities for us to use those funds, use those savings to invest back into the system. The other would be to try to attract actual new revenues, new opportunities where new monies would come in. The most substantial opportunity we think in that regard will be transit-oriented development, public-private partnerships. That will not pay for a $33 million per year deficit, but it can bring some new revenues. MARTA has real estate holdings throughout the region, and we may be able to find some more optimal uses of those in partnership with the development community and so forth. We are in the early stages of that, but that's something the board has shown a great deal of interest in, and it's something that we are investigating and want to make sure we have the right expertise on board as we move forward in that. So in terms of true, pure new revenue opportunities, that's probably the greatest opportunity, but at the same time we'll be looking for efficiency, cost savings, efficiency measures and so forth that would free up dollars that in turn could be used to invest in the system.
May I follow, Mr. Chair?
You may.
It seems to me that transit-oriented development opportunities, particularly in my district, are very important opportunities. At the same time, the time frame for those, to put a deal together and get it, and to get it up out of the ground is mid to long term. Same thing with implementing many of these efficiencies, and so arriving at savings and revenue enhancements is going to take time. The question I have, and I really, I think in some instances the will is the issue. That is, we're going to fund a new stadium with $300 million of public money. The question, and it's at this point rhetorical because you've answered my question, but where do we find the money so we don't find ourselves in that situation, the same situation that I've been on MARTOC since around 2001.
Sure.
We have to look at opportunities, structural opportunities to fund MARTA and to make it more than the bare bones system that it is. That's just my point of view. Thank you, Mr. General Manager.
Senator Stoner.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We've had this discussion before, but we'll go over it one more time. since this is my last committee meeting, I'll be a bit philosophical about it. Simply put, if you do all this and we're successful with MARTA, in the sense there may still be a gulf. At the end of the day, with everything you do, and depending on tax revenues, we still may have a gulf in the sense of the ability to fund the system. Okay?
Yes.
And I guess the point for this committee and for this legislature is at some point, are we going to be willing to fund the capital city's transit system, where half the population in the sense of the metropolitan area, lives in the state? Now, I know you've dealt with some issues in previous states where you had systems that got no funding. And so, I mean, obviously, you want to kind of talk about the issues you faced there, sound somewhat similar to what you're facing here, in the sense of what you have, I think, particularly in Texas, if I'm not mistaken.
Well, every region is a little bit different. Every city is a little bit different. But I'll say to this committee the same thing that I mentioned in a meeting with the governor yesterday, and that is we are not asking the state legislature for money this year.
Right.
And I don't think it would help much if we did, to be candid. But we do plan, and I mentioned this to the governor, that we will be asking for money in future years, that once we have shown definitively, measurably, quantitatively, that we are an efficient system, that we are very responsive to our customer needs, and that our employees wear the badge of MARTA and wear the uniform with their chest out in a way that they become 4,500 wonderful ambassadors to the system, that we will be coming to the state and saying you need to make a greater investment in this, what is an excellent public transportation system. That's our goal, that we use these first year or two to sort of get our house in order. But then I've heard universally that if MARTA has the right reputation, if MARTA uses its money wisely, then we'd be willing to support. I'm going to make sure we hold people to that we're going to do our part on the internal, and then we'll be coming to you asking for your support as we do believe that this transit system merits additional investment.
Well, I hope my colleagues that are here who've said that once you get your house in order, we'll be happy to do some funding. Well, I hope it wasn't just a bunch of talk. I hope they do follow through on that once you've demonstrated and based on your previous experience and hopefully success in the future, is demonstrated, that you're running an efficient system that is being utilized, and that the state government, since we're one of only 10 states, maybe 9 states now, that does not provide any funding for transit, not just to our major capital city, but throughout the whole state. I mean, I'm sorry, say again.
What Charlotte does, the state does for Charlotte.
They do.
Keith would know.
Yeah, they do.
Give us an idea of what we're talking about. I'm just curious. That's who we would compare ourselves to.
Right. Well, when we arrived and the Charlotte area transit system was formed back in 1999, 2000, the state was providing some level, a relatively small level of operating assistance, and then a small capital. They would help with matching federal grant dollars and so forth. But by the time we left, they were investing hundreds of millions of dollars. And in fact, for the light rail line, the initial light rail line, they provided 25% of the $462.7 million cost of the first line.
This is the state.
The state. And then for the extension of that, a $1.1 billion extension, they provided the 25% towards it as well. So they went from a relatively modest investor in the transit system to a huge investor in the transit.
And a good point on that, if I may, Mr. Chairman, is that the state itself has always been active in rail, in general commuter rail service, in the sense of what they've been doing on that high-speed rail corridor, providing service between the cities. And you were having to compete against that issue, I would suspect, to the state. In the sense, historically speaking, my point being is that they've been a lot more aggressive on rail issues in North Carolina than we have in this state on a statewide level.
I don't know the history to that level of detail. The message we try
I can tell you, I know the history.
Well, the message we try to convey very solidly was that it's an investment, and that if you put these millions of dollars into this service, it will bring back huge returns to the state, and the state has embraced it at this point.
Thank you, Mr.
Mr. Allen, do you have anything to add? All right. Then we'll go ahead and conclude on that note.
Okay, thank you.
Oh, but I have requested a copy of the board a copy of the policy about the 45% guidance on the cap on bonded debt service, and a project list of for the current bond issue that just occurred.
We got it. We'll get it for you.
Thank you. All right, moving on. The overtime issue. I will say the amount of overtime, apparently open records requests were performed by WSB and by the Atlanta Journal-Constitution that revealed a large amount of overtime being worked by some operators and public safety employees. And I mean, I view that as a problem. I view that as a problem because of its impact on the taxpayers, but more significantly because of its impact on public safety. Obviously there comes a point when you're working so many hours and you're in a critical position, whether it's a bus operator, that is doing something that's inherently dangerous, or protecting the public's safety, that a number of hours worked is too many, and so obviously I've seen some of those documents, although I'm going to ask you to produce to me exactly what was produced to WSB and to the Atlanta Journal-Constitution, because I want to see those documents as produced. And then I want to understand, in light of those revelations, what steps MARTA is taking to address the problem. And for that, I'll turn it over to Mr. Parker.
All right. Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. And this is an issue, actually, that many transit systems around the country are faced with. And one of the reasons is simply because of, I don't know if you would call it a hole in legislation that impacts almost all other transportation providers, including over-the-road truck drivers and those types of folks. But there's federal requirements that people not drive more than a certain number of hours. Public transit is specifically excluded from many of those regulations. As it stands currently, at MARTA, a person...
And that's federal regulations you're talking
Yes.
about, right?
Yes.
Okay.
Right, and as it stands currently at MARTA, a person could conceivably drive what I think most folks intuitively would look at as too many hours in a particular week. Now, as it relates to the people who were identified in the news story, we looked very closely at their records, and our HR group and personnel folks had a chance to go back and look at every one of those people who are the highest of users of overtime. And there's literally no correlation between the number of hours they've worked in accidents, complaints, those sorts of things. So, and that was surprising. I actually thought that if you're someone who's working an 80-hour work week, then you would be more apt to get in an accident, have lots of customer complaints, those sorts of things. We haven't seen that as a correlative matter. Regardless, I'm of the opinion, and our senior leadership is certainly of the opinion, that we need to take some steps to prevent anything from happening, because we don't want to be on the other side of this and say 2 years from now or whatever, some catastrophic event happens and we found that the person was working a 90-hour work week. So over the next few weeks, we will be developing some policy changes that will significantly reduce the amount of hours a person can work. We want people to be able to work safely. At the same time, we do have to make sure we have enough personnel on board to effectively run the service. Police have already taken a number of actions internally where the information you've seen was anecdotal. If you were to look now at where folks are, things are already improved. So the new policy, for example, that the police department has, no one could work more than 24 hours of overtime in a given week, and that number is going to be reduced even more so that a given person cannot roughly work more than a 12-hour workday. So that's our goal, is to get somewhere along those lines. We'll be discussing this in some detail with our represented employees as well. But the ultimate goal, of course, is public safety, making sure that we don't put people out there in a state where they can't effectively handle a 30,000-pound piece of equipment, and making sure that they get our folks and themselves home safely.
You have some questions. Let me start with Senator Fort.
Okay. It seems to me that before you can label something a problem, you need to know the facts and you need to know the details. And I appreciate you, Mr. General Manager, for giving us the information that that you've just given us, so we can better understand the implications of this overtime. I have a couple of questions. What are those federal regs in terms of the amount of time that an operator can be on the road?
Roughly, I believe the number is 14 hours per day.
14 hours per day.
To 10 hours maximum driving, and then a total of 15 hours working, per se.
Okay.
So that those numbers, those guidelines, essentially, and you'll hear it all the time with the over-the-road drivers, the folks driving the big semi-trucks and so forth.
Mm-hmm.
They have to get their assignments done in that 10-hour drive period, but then they can spend some additional hours loading up the vehicles and that sort of thing. But again, it excludes public transit.
Okay. But if you were to, then the question is, are y'all abiding? I mean, what is your internal policy, or do you have an internal policy?
Our current policy allows for up to, I believe, 14 to 16 hours
Mm-hmm.
of work per day. In fact, I think it is 16 hours per hour. I'm sorry, 16 hours a day. And again, that's a number that we all look at this point and say that's not a healthy number.
Okay, and last two-part. I mean, I still don't understand, as I sit here, why do operators accumulate overtime?
Why do they?
I mean, why is it that you have operators accumulating so much overtime? I mean, there must be a reason.
Right.
And then my second question is, if an operator says, no, I don't want to do, I'm tired, I don't want to do another shift,
Mm-hmm.
what options does that operator have? Can they refuse?
Yes.
Okay.
Well, essentially, how it's set up, let me answer the first part of your question. I'm sorry, the second part first. Operators bid on the work according to seniority.
Yes,
and we have a group of what we call an extra board of people whose whole purpose is to fill in gaps of service that's not covered currently by the everyday, regular 40-hour type people. And so by seniority, they pick out all these additional pieces of work as they come available. Some of them, because of just the amount of work that's out there, end up accumulating huge numbers of hours. And so that's where you could see a person not making, like one of the newspaper stories I think reported a person accumulated $177,000 worth of overtime. That was over a 3-year period. But
3 year period.
It was over a 3-year period, yeah, but the way, unfortunately, the way it was written, people would read it and think, okay, there's a bus driver making $177,000 a year in overtime. Yeah. So still the amount was substantial, but again, the framing of it left a misinterpretation. I'd say a perception that was not accurate. But still, what we want to do is come up with policy that would be fair to the operators who want to work a great deal of, who want to work more and make more money. That's fine, because as I mentioned, some of these folks are high performing who work a lot of these hours, but at the same time protect them and protect the customers. The other question you ask is, why is overtime necessary anyway? For a variety of reasons. Everything from when we set up the initial runs, we actually build in a certain amount of overtime into the route. That's more cost effective than hiring a whole new person and paying his or her benefit package and all those things. And it's a balancing act. You get to a threshold where it becomes unhealthy and the agency's spending too much money. Police had reached that point, so that when they've made their changes recently, we're seeing upwards of $1 million worth of savings over the course of a calendar year by reducing the amount of overtime that was available. We'll be continuing to do analysis internally to see where that right balancing point is.
Thank you, sir.
And let me also add, this will take a while, so I don't want to give the impression this is a switch that you just flip and then 3 weeks from now, we will have all of this completely worked out. It'll take a while to work through all the labor agreements, work through how we hire. Maybe it may be necessary to hire some additional folks so that we won't have as much overtime available and what have you. So this will take a while, but the goal is to ultimately reduce the amount of time any one person can work.
And that's what hiring, are you going to have to hire more people? Are you going to have to hire more operators? How many? What's the cost, salary, benefit package, et cetera? Do you know?
All excellent questions, and we don't know yet. Those are things we'll be working on.
All right. And, well, I appreciate the occasional swipe at the chair. I will say, not from Senator Ford, not from you, Mr. Parker. I will say this. I am willing to jump to the conclusion that some of the numbers that I saw in the reports that were presented to me are excessive. And so, yes, I did jump to that conclusion, and I will continue to jump to that conclusion because I think the conclusion is right. And I think that the conclusion is right borne out by the fact that the conclusion is right is borne out by the fact that MARTA is actually taking action to address the issue. Now, yes, that's what they just said. So what I want to understand is ultimately you are hoping to get to a cap of 12 hours. Is that what we're looking at?
I don't know if 12 hours is the right number. It may be 14. That's what we will be studying.
Okay, all right. But and ultimately this will be a subject that is addressed by MARTA board policy. I mean, you're going to pass and implement a policy at the board level.
I actually don't know if that's a board policy or no. It's not. It's actually not a board policy.
And it'll be dealt with through the contract with the unions.
And maybe even not there. We have to look and see what authorities we have as management versus what things are included in the labor contract. This is a very complex area because it touches on just about everything and impacts almost every element of what we do. So that's why, again, I want to caution that this won't be something that will be completely done and addressed in a matter of weeks. It'll take some time.
All right. Senator Miller.
Follow up to this. Have you all looked at what is the effect on this overtime of sickness? How do your sickness numbers stack up versus what you see in your peer groups throughout the country? That's my question. Is I know as you're planning and you have to build so much overtime in, but it seems to me that when you have this kind of amount of overtime over and above what most people would consider normal, that there's a sickness factor in here. And if that number is way out of line, what can you do to more control that?
Well,
maybe I'm making an assumption that you've got too much sick outs, and that's maybe contributed to this particular reason. Because you've built in a certain amount of overtime. I understand what you explained to me. But there's a reason why we're excessive. And it's not just because seniority gets you more hours, because people aren't showing up. I think there's some of that, too, is there not?
We need to do further analysis.
That's in the audit from what I understood. I remember right there.
The audit mentions that that MARTA, in comparison to other systems, has more...
excessive compared to other systems, yeah.
And again, I don't recall the word if it was excessive or not, but it did mention that in comparison to other peer groups, MARTA did have more people missing time. And so that's part of the analysis that we have to take
going on
to see, again, what's the right balance.
Okay, thank you.
Representative Mitchell.
Mr. Parker, you mentioned that there were some adjustments made in the public safety department. I'm curious as to if there, as a result of those adjustments, were there any savings, and if so, how did they come about? Did they hire new public safety officers, or?
I think it was more of reallocation of folks and getting them closer to the precincts they normally work, giving them more on-duty time, where they're actively engaged in it. Make sure I'm saying this right, that they're engaged in the work that they want them to be focused on more so than doing other duties. So keep them closer to their precincts, keeping them on assignments that make the most sense for them. So as a result, we were able to reduce the amount of time, the amount of overtime, while still keeping people's presence where they needed to be felt. And there was a savings.
And no additional people were hired?
Now that I'll have to look to expert.
No, sir. No additional.
No new folks, just reallocation of resources.
Representative Taylor.
I've got a couple questions, and back to the public safety, and just because I don't know the answer to this, when a MARTA police officer arrests somebody, whether it's in Fulton or DeKalb, do they take them to the Fulton County Jail or DeKalb County Jail? I just don't know the answer to that question.
Yes, sir. It depends on the jurisdiction they're in. If they're in DeKalb, they'll take them to DeKalb, Fulton, and Atlanta to Atlanta.
Okay, and I think that depending on how many arrests you make in a day, that puts an officer down for however long it takes to transport. Have you considered at all transport officers? I know my city just added transport officers, so we don't take police officers off of a beat or off of a patrol to transport people to DeKalb County Jail, which at certain times of the day from Dunwoody to Decatur can actually take an officer off the street for several hours, 3 days. No, not friend. I just wanted to throw that out and see if that had been considered.
Well, let us look into that
Dedicating
and then get
people.
back to you.
Okay.
I'll give you an answer.
The other one, I just, from my experience, spent 21 years in the military, fatigue does affect judgment. And, my personal experience, excessive fatigue, working 80, 90 hours in a week, or I think, like I said, it just, I think, it inversely affects capability to perform critical tasks, particularly in law enforcement and in the vehicle operator areas. It just is your judgment is slower, your reactions are slower, and I just real concerned that's creating down the line, if it's not fixed, liability issues for you. If somebody were to sue, they'd have a pattern of officer A, B, or C has worked excessive hours during a time and incident, whatever that incident occurred. And I guess my last thing would be to you said you couldn't correlate the hours worked to any accidents. Can you correlate that to individuals? Because I got a concern that maybe a small group of people are making a whole lot of money. We had that in the police department recently, local police department recently, where you had a small group of individuals who are getting every bit of overtime that at the expense of public safety and literally it was a small group of people getting rich off of extended duty.
Well, what we did was look at the people who had the highest amount of overtime usage, and to see if there was some elements that you would look at to say that these were low performers, that because of their working so many hours, they were getting in accidents, they were getting lots of complaints, that sort of thing, and we just did not find that.
Okay. Thank
you. Okay. Any further questions on this subject? Seeing none, here's how I'd like to proceed on this issue. I'm going to ask MARTA to produce to me the reports that were produced to the Atlanta Journal-Constitution and and to WSB TV. The objective will be to compare those reports to similar reports produced, later on in 2013. Toward the end of the year, and see if there is some movement in a reduction in terms of a reduction in overtime worked by employees who were working the most, in particular, but across the board. I also would like to get an update. We'll do this either in a full committee hearing. We do have a public safety subcommittee of this committee. We'll either do this in a full committee meeting or in a public safety subcommittee meeting a couple of months from now, just to see where we stand with regard to MARTA addressing this particular issue. Obviously, I do want MARTA to act prudently. It sounds like MARTA is in the process of acting prudently with regard to the substantial amounts of overtime that I saw in the reports that were shown to me previously. But that will only be borne out by numbers that appear on the same reports that I saw previously, but I actually don't have them, which is why I'm requesting them. And then I'd like to, over set periods of time, monitor MARTA's progress with regard to self-policing this particular issue. So are we clear on that?
Good.
Okay. All right. So that is agenda item number three. And then number 4 is a presentation that was made to the MARTA board with regard to public safety initiatives that were spearheaded by Mr. Parker, or that are being spearheaded by Mr. Parker, and I'd like to hear about them.
Right. Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Our excuse me, our chief of police couldn't be here today, but part of what she and I have been talking a great deal about, as well as to our board members, is that for us to be successful, bottom line, we have to be perceived as being a safe system. That there's nothing more fundamental to a person who chooses to ride MARTA, or any other public transit system for that matter, than the feeling of being safe when you're on the system. The numbers, as you and I have talked about briefly, Mr. Chairman, indicate that MARTA, when compared to most transit systems of its size around the country, does compare actually favorably. That the number of incidents that occur on the vehicles and so forth are actually not that bad. However, perception-wise, I hear it nonstop since I've been here, and even before I got here, that MARTA is not necessarily a safe system, and some people say I won't ride because they believe that the system's not safe. So we've been thinking about what things we can do internally and how we can work community-wide to improve that perception and the reality of being on our services. So we've talked about...
And Mr. Parker, if I may just interject there, I you know, often part of this, I mean, this committee's responsibility is oversight. And so often we are perceived as being critical of MARTA. And I mean, I guess that comes with the territory. But I do want to say, first of all, I appreciate all the work you're doing to improve the perception of public safety. But I have been impressed, and this is credit both to MARTA's management and particularly the police force. I have been favorably impressed with MARTA's crime rates. I mean, they really do stack up well against other systems in other cities. And that is, you know, while we do have a perception issue to address, which you're about to get into, I do think it is a credit to our MARTA police force that the crime rates are where they are, which you know, which does stack up well against other systems.
Well, I appreciate you saying that, and we will certainly convey those comments back. But even with pretty good numbers, I think we can do more. And the reality is that people believe that MARTA is not as safe as it should be. Many people in the community believe that. So we want to make sure that we do everything we can to rid that perception. So we will be moving forward with some ideas and initiatives that will, we think, reduce the number of nuisance-type behaviors that occur on our vehicles. Everything from panhandling to loud music, to people taking up more than one seat at a time, all the things that would drive people like us from not wanting to ride the service frequently. So part of what we've asked the police to do, and in fact they began that over the Christmas period, they did a lot of plainclothes work where any type of nuisance behavior they saw, there was a zero tolerance to that type of behavior, so we ended up escorting several hundred people off of the vehicles. But we want to not just be engaged in dealing with the same person over and over again who engages in the same repetitive bad behavior or nuisance type behavior. So we'll be looking for opportunities where we can first ask for compliance, maybe even ask a second time, but then once we see a person that is a repetitive offender, that we begin to look at excluding and possibly even banning that person from our services for extended periods of time. And for certain offenses, ban them completely from the service and not have an opportunity to come back. So we are going to be coming forward with a number of different things that we want to try to get more and more of the message out there that MARTA will not tolerate knucklehead behavior on our services. We will be engaged with many folks in the community, including working with advocates for the disabled, because we find that, again, people who are afraid to ride the service become hesitant to ride. First, they're hesitant to ride and then become afraid to ride, and then that actually can cost us money. A typical disabled person who may be able to use our regular bus or or train service may decide, because they don't feel safe on those services, that they want to ride our paratransit service, which costs 10 times more to provide the same type of trip. In addition, we want to make sure our seniors feel comfortable when they're riding, so we will be making outreach to advocates within the senior communities to find out what things we can do to make them feel safer on our services. I'll be hosting meetings with the area superintendents from DeKalb, Fulton, and the City of Atlanta Public Schools to talk to them about how we can make students feel safer when they're riding with us, and also to let them know that MARTA will not put up with certain types of behavior at the same time. So the goal is to make everybody feel good about riding the service, feel comfortable about getting on the service, and for those who would refuse to comply with that, we're going to be very vigilant in terms of making sure those folks understand that we're serious about it, and then those who still don't comply, get them off our service.
Oh, you hit your button and ask that question. Well, hold on. You got two in front of you, though. Representative Mitchell.
No, Mr. Chairman, thank you so very much, and I won't belabor the issue because I'm interested in to hear the answer to Representative Miller's question. But this has been since I've been on this committee, this is been a pet peeve of mine, is the changing of the perception that is needed for MARTA. The example that I have used more than once with this board over the holidays, I even had the opportunity to visit New York, the New York metropolitan area, use the public transportation system there, goes through some of the most wealthiest communities and some of the most impoverished communities, and everyone, not only those who have no other choice, but everyone uses the public transportation system, and it's amazing that they don't have those kinds of issues there. I will say maybe about 4 or 5 years ago, there was this growing perception of it being not safe on the public transportation system in New York, and they did this survey, and people, the majority of the vote, felt unsafe. So the public transportation system there did this marketing program. I remember they even had a jingle where, it was safe to use the public transportation system. They did a survey again after that, and they found that the overwhelming majority of the people felt that the public transportation system was safe, when in reality, the only thing that had changed was the marketing program. And I do believe that's what the incidents here. I remember a former police chief in Atlanta told me that there's more crimes that occur at Lenox Mall than occur with our MARTA system. And I do believe that we need to change the perception, and good to hear you address that issue.
And I mean, the nice thing about what Mr. Parker is seeking to do is that it is not just a marketing program. I mean, it actually is taking action to make the system more hospitable for riders. So.
We just have this perception here, and those of you who've read even how MARTA came to an existence, we've got some communities that don't want MARTA there because they feel that there's certain communities would come, ride MARTA, steal their TVs and radios, get back on MARTA, and go back to their communities. So we've got to change that kind of perception.
Representative Riley.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And to add on to that, when I was at the meeting with you all on Monday, you mentioned a rider's code of conduct policy that you were contemplating. And I was very excited about that, and I think that will also go a very long way to restore some confidence in the casual rider as well as the lifeline rider. I think, again, perception is a great deal of the reality, and all of the methods that you're already contemplating and having in the conversations, I think, will go a long way to help resolve that. So I was very pleased to hear that, and I'm glad we're getting to give more exposure today on many of these different considerations you've got before you.
Well, if I can make a quick comment to that, Mr. Chairman.
Certainly.
And that would be, when we reach the point where things are where they should be, it's when customers demand that, or not put up with, nuisance type behaviors.
Right.
And so that the customers will be the ones who, when the person gets on there, when their music's too loud, or they're jostling around too much, or they're taking up 2 seats and so forth, that's when we know we will have arrived. Now, we are also going to be strategic with technology as well.
Right.
So we're looking for different ways. You can use your cell phones.
Right.
And of course, on trains, that becomes a little tricky because phones don't work as well. But our IT folks are looking at ways that a person can safely identify someone who's engaging in uncivil behaviors on our vehicles. I want to stress our numbers, as the chairman has mentioned, are not that bad, but the perception is that things are a lot worse on the vehicles than what they are, and people make their decisions based on perceptions, not reality.
Thank you.
Senator Miller.
Two things. I think you're absolutely right that from a public perception standpoint, and I would just urge you, because you're the new person in town, that whether it's with the AJC, the Atlanta Business Chronicle, that as you implement this public safety program, that you get the word out and you do an ongoing PR thing that so that people can make sure that here's the statistics, here's where we are, here's the kind of things we're doing, because you don't ever hear about that. And I think from a public service standpoint, these newspapers, okay, and the news people, they can publish this stuff when you get it out there. You're the new person in town, so you have that opportunity. It's not the same old thing, as they say, and new sheriff in town, so to speak. But the other thing I would ask you, this thing with the cameras we've talked about, where are we on it? I mean, this thing's huge. It makes a tremendous difference. I go so far to say even if there isn't film in there, but if they can see their picture in there when they're looking at a camera, it deters a lot of bad behavior, and particularly on the trains, I think, particularly from young people, if they see that thing looking at them up there. And I just wonder, where are we, because I think that's probably one of the greatest things you can do and get that message out that we're looking at you. And I think that's very, very important. So just where are we on this thing?
The camera system is being installed on the buses as we speak, and I believe completion this summer?
Yes, we have about 50 buses so far.
About 50 buses of a more than 500 bus fleet, but I believe by the end of the summer or so, we should have the camera installations just about completed on the buses, and then we'll start with the rail cars. You're absolutely right. That was something we made a commitment to in Charlotte back at around 2000.
Did you see a significant change in behavior?
Big reduction in the nuisance type behaviors, because the camera systems, they document what's going on.
I've seen it at Waffle House, okay? They've put them in all their locations.
Yes, so that is a commitment that this board and previous boards have made capital-wise, so we will begin to see the fruition of that come in the next few months. I think it is a very, very big deal, but even then, we still need to make sure that people know that,
words out.
That the system is serious about people behaving themselves.
Thank you.
Representative Taylor.
Just two observations following up on Representative Mitchell's thing. I think the best marketing program you can have is a policeman walking through a train. You know, no formal marketing program gives you the warm and fuzzy like watching an officer in uniform go from car to car on a train. Second, I guess the second observation I have is, you know, this goes back to a larger issue too. This is an economic development issue for the city, for the region, really. You know, if I get off a train in Atlanta, my first business trip here, if I get off a plane and get onto the airport and I see the nuisance behavior, that's my impression immediately of this locale, not just MARTA, but the area in general, the city in general. And it goes back to a larger issue. You know, like I said, when an executive gets off and is coming to meet the governor and gets on the train at the airport and has that perception, whether it's real or not, that it's not safe, it's hard to change that. Just an observation.
Any further questions from members of the committee? Seeing none, anything further, Mr. Parker?
No, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, that's our last agenda item. Let me just recap items that I have requested to be produced. One is the MARTA board policy with regard to the cap on bonded debt service. One is a list of the projects that are proposed to be funded with the most recent bond issue. One is the overtime records that were produced to the AJC and to WSB. So those three items. I also have one further assignment. If I can have Mr. Allen and Ms. O'Neill come forward, I'm going to have you team up with Representative Riley on something we need done. Yes. We received it at the last meeting. I'll get you a copy of it. Yeah, I'll get you a copy of it.
Morning.
Representative Riley has been taking a look at, we have obviously a legislative package that we intend to introduce hopefully before the end of January. And one of the issues that we'd like to address is the martoc reporting requirements that are contained in the MARTA Act. They don't get us information in a format that is easily digestible and that's easy to understand and is easy to match up from one set of records to another. And so I am tasking Representative Riley with producing some language for us that would be revisions to the MARTA Act. As I understand it, she has been talking with Mr. Allen about how better to do this. And then I bring Ms. O'Neill up because you are, you're a lawyer and you're thoroughly familiar with the MARTA Act. So I am hoping that with Mr. Parker's indulgence, that between Representative Riley, Ms. O'Neill, and Mr. Allen, we can work out some within the next week. Fortunately, we're on a tight time frame. Work out some changes to the MARTA Act with actual language brought to me. To change the martoc reporting requirements to get more along the lines of what Mr. Allen and Representative Riley have discussed. Right? Okay. So, is there anything else from members of the committee or from Mr. Parker or Mr. Daniels? Seeing nothing.
Well, Mr. Chairman?
Yes, Representative Mitchell.
I just want to say what a pleasure it was to work with Senator Doug Stoner, recognizing that this is his last meeting. He's been a valiant public servant, and he's here till the end. And I just wanted to say publicly how much he appreciated his service.
I do. I want to say, at the last meeting we gave him a round of applause. I think he's earned a second round of applause. So. And on that note, this final meeting of the MARTA Oversight Committee for the 2011-2012 term of the General Assembly is adjourned.